After days of digging, the city finally uncovered the busted pipe this morning.
The increased pressure kind of separated the pipe at the joint.
The break to the 42-inch sewer main on Kaolu Street threatened to back raw sewage into buildings and homes in Waikiki.
We needed an outlet, and the Ala Wai was the most convenient outlet for us.
Since Friday, the city has channeled the sewage into Ala Wai Canal. Just how much untreated wastewater? No firm figure from the city. But the Beach Walk pumping station in Waikiki handles about 15 million gallons a day. So best guess?
We know that it's in the millions of gallons so far.
The city says it's monitoring bacteria levels in the Ala Wai. Warning signs are posted for beachgoers at Ala Moana and canal users. The first plan of attack is to wrap the broken pipe in fiberglass and hydraulic cement. If that fails, there's plan B.
We're going to have to go in and cut the pipe and put in another piece and try and weld it together and then pour another concrete jacket.
The fix could be in by Friday, but it could take until Monday to repair the broken line. Until then, consider the Ala Wai off limits.
Hello, my name is Guy Ragusta. I started this Pikoi project in June 2006 as a stream ecology and curriculum coordinator. My role in this work is to create two final products. One is a stream science curriculum for high schools of Hawaii, which we hope will lead to a field-based educational experience for students around the islands by going outdoors and conducting stream water quality monitoring using advanced scientific technology and Hawaiian cultural values. My second role in this Pikoi project is creating an educational film documentary related to the recent Ala Wai sewage spill of March 2006, in which approximately 50 million gallons of raw sewage were discharged into the Ala Wai Canal and potentially had a major negative effect on surrounding beach communities dependent upon recreational water use for their livelihood.
One surfer in particular, Oliver Johnson, died of flesh-eating bacteria after falling in the Ala Wai Canal shortly after the 50 million gallon raw sewage spill occurred. So for those that surf at Bowls, the outlet of the Ala Wai Canal, it's important to know the history of how the Ala Wai Canal was built.
On October 17, 1928, Dillingham's Hawaiian Dredging Company ran an advertisement in Honolulu Advertiser, Special Waikiki Edition. The advertisement read,
"Hundreds of acres of swamplands reclaimed into what is now one of Waikiki's finest districts. Today there are beautiful homes where once a swamp existed. Hundreds of acres of land were filled in and a broad canal cut through from the sea to the territorial fairgrounds. With the development of the boulevard, which will run the full length of the canal, and the many fine homes and the palatial hotel which are planned for this district, it will without doubt be one of the most attractive sections of the city. The dredge Kevalo lifted its first mud and coral from the canal bed on January 30th, 1922. After 5½ years of work, it had dug a canal 3 miles long, with an average depth of 25 feet and a breadth of 250 feet. During this 5½ years of operation, 1,750,000 cubic yards of material were removed and distributed over hundreds of acres of swampland. $1,500,000 invested in the future of Honolulu, reclaimed land worth many millions more. The reclamation of this land was a great project and an important factor in making Waikiki the beautiful residential district that it is today."
According to court documents submitted by the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund in its successful suit against the City and County of Honolulu, 72 million gallons of human sewage containing 70% solids is flushed from 206,000 toilets into the ocean 1.5 miles off Sand Island every day. 50% of these solids, or 36 million gallons, rise to the surface within 3 to 5 minutes. This is 3 times the amount of oil spilled by the Exxon Valdez. Prevailing ocean and wind currents transport this pathogen-laden sewage directly into Ala Moana Park, Magic Island, and Waikiki itself. The Manoa Stream and the Ala Wai Canal have been described as sinks of environmental pollution by Bruce Anderson, Deputy Director for the State Department of Health.
And that's true. I think we have a unique situation in tropical environments. In fact, as I recall, the levels of illness associated with the EPA standard, which is 35 per 100 mils of water, correspond to an increased rate of gastroenteritis of about 19 cases per 1,000 people. And there's a linear relationship between the levels of enterococcus and water quality. So there is, in some studies, some correlation, and we're not blowing it off. I mean, yeah, enterococcus is probably a reasonably good indicator in some environments, but in tropical environments there are some unique problems, like it multiplies. And when you see the references, you'll see some of the problems associated with it.
The following are references to which Dr. Bruce Anderson was referring regarding fecal bacteria research on the overpopulated tropical islands of Oahu and Guam. The U.S. EPA recommends that all states test their fresh and marine waters for the fecal bacteria Enterococcus, which they say correlates to increased incidence rates of gastrointestinal illness. But some researchers claim that Enterococcus occurs naturally in tropical island soil and waters from non-fecal sources based on research conducted in lower elevations of the heavily populated tropical islands of Oahu and Guam, and that therefore Enterococcus are not valid as indicators of fecal contamination as stated by the U.S. EPA.
Fujioka described last time is that essentially these bacteria have been washed out of the soil. So they multiply in the soil, and whenever it rains, you're just getting a flushing reaction where they're flushed out of the soil into the streams and ultimately into the canal. Which poses lots of questions. And again, the health significance is unclear. These are not disease-causing organisms. They are also associated with sewage, and people attribute them to sewage, but in tropical environments where they multiply in nature, they're not a very good indicator.
Was the fecal bacteria Enterococcus a good indicator for waters of tropical islands? Did hotels and sewage and increased populations of animals cause the levels to increase in surrounding waters? Some of the older peer-reviewed research suggests that fecal bacteria occur naturally in water and soils of tropical islands and therefore aren't valid as indicators. But some of the more recent research on rural tropical islands shows that fecal bacteria may not be occurring naturally, and that may be a cause of overpopulation, stream deforestation, urbanization, and excessive recreation within these ecosystems. But to find out for sure, I went down to the Ala Wai Canal with some colleagues.
So they can keep doing what they're doing to provide.
Now we're getting GPS coordinates of the sewage spill site so we can have a relatively precise location as to where we collected our samples. I'm just waiting for the satellites to connect. Capping the sample.
Did you think you were close to the bottom, guy?
This is probably about 7 feet, so
okay,
about
down.
7 feet down.
Probably another 2 or 3 feet to the bottom.
Yeah.
What did we get here, 11 feet?
Yeah,
Something like that?
about 11 feet. So we hopefully got some representative water samples from a few feet above the bottom.
Enterococci, because of our location here in a tropical climate, it really puts us in a bind. Fortunately, we had Clostridium that the EPA allows us to use as a secondary indicator, and when used properly, Clostridium really gives us a great tool to use.
Clostridium perfringens was added as an indicator of fecal contamination by the Hawaii Department of Health, thereby giving 2 fecal indicators that have to be exceeded before the Department of Health posts warnings regarding fecal contamination from animals and people on beaches. Therefore, both Enterococcus and Clostridium perfringens had to be exceeded before the public was warned regarding fecal contamination.
To find out more about how fecal contamination might move through urbanized watersheds of Honolulu down to Waikiki Beach, I went to talk with Dr. Mark Walker, expert hydrologist at the University of Hawaii.
Contaminants, for example microbes, have a finite lifespan. When many of the parasites can't really exist outside of a host. So that means that when they're out in the environment, one of the only things that can happen with them is that they die. And the speed at which they die is determined by a lot of different things, but sometimes it's primarily determined by things like temperature and the available moisture content in the soil. All right, so that means that when you have sort of hot, dry periods, all right, the microbes are less likely to be hanging around in the soil and surviving in a way that would infect somebody downstream if they happen to be washed away. However, during the wet periods of the year, when it's cooler and wetter, and when transport potential is a little higher because the soils are saturated, the survival time for these parasites could be a little bit longer. And so one of the things that you risk when you have a lot more development in a watershed, and I don't think a lot of people have focused on this or tried to plan for it, is that you have greatly increased transport potential. You might have an increased amount of time that the parasites reside in the soil and survive.
Given concerns for infectious disease to transport through polluted surface waters of tropical islands, I went to seek advice from expert epidemiologists to see how to handle these types of situations.
The recent events and other cases that we see, and certainly, people I've seen in clinical settings, it's sort of the same thing. Signs of infection that they need to look for: redness around the site, pain out of proportion to the wound, and that would mean, a lot of us, obviously, when you get a little scratch, you know what it should feel like. If you just barely brush against it and it's really painful, or you can barely move your limb because it's hurting, that's obviously abnormal.
So our crew went to Ala Moana Bowls, the popular surf break at the Ala Wai Canal mouth, to collect sediment samples from the bottom of the surf break, and back to the Ala Wai Canal sewage spill site to collect samples from the bottom where the sewage all spilled, and transported the samples back to FQ Labs in Honolulu following standard operating procedures. And we found that Ala Moana Bowls sand samples collected in July 2006 had Enterococcus concentrations as high as 12,000 colony-forming units per gram of sand about 3 months after the 50 million gallon sewage spill in Waikiki. But regardless of whether or not fecal bacteria occur naturally in tropical island soils and waters, it's really important to know that there are solutions to the pollution problems.
You want me to spell it? Spell it, please. Good morning, my name's Chad Durkin, Chaddurkin. I'm an ecologist with Natural Systems, a local Hawaiian company doing bioremediation here in the state of Hawaii. Now, bioremediation is the idea that life can actually clean or remediate our environments. And the idea is that we're copying natural systems. An example of a natural system would be a wetland. Wetlands are environments at the low point of watersheds where water from the mountains that runs off during rain would collect and stay in this wetland environment for a period of time before going out into the ocean. What would happen in this environment is that the animals and plants that live in the wetland would be using whatever ran off the mountains for food. So this is the basic idea behind ecological engineering, and one of the main ecological principles is that the waste of a system is going to be the food for a population within that system or a neighboring system. So waste equals food. The pollution is food for something. We just have to find out what's going to eat it. And when we're dealing with organic pollution, which oftentimes is primary nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, this we know is plant food. So these nutrients, or non-point source pollution runoff, nutrient pollution, can be food for plants. So our idea here at the Ala Wai is that we're going to be growing akuli plants, which are native Hawaiian plants, and they will be using the pollution for their food. Now, the plants are growing on rafts, and these rafts are floating the plants because the akuli is not a floating aquatic plant. It's actually found growing in the soil. But in this installation, there is no soil. The plant roots are growing directly in the water without soil. This is called hydroponic growth. And they're receiving their nutrients out of the water. So as these plants eat, they suck up nutrients out of the water, feeding the plants and also cleaning the water. Nitrogen and phosphorus are the two main nutrient pollutants that are listed on the permit from the state of Hawaii for this watershed. So as we can remove these nutrients from the water becomes cleaner. That's the phytoremediation talk.
Great. Really good at it.
50 water samples collected in 2008 via helicopter on Ko'olau summits of Oahu in headwaters without pig sign or humans had Enterococcus geometric mean concentrations of 6 most probable number per 100 milliliters. Safe for recreational contact according to the US EPA.